Welcome to Speaking History, where we're diving into a brand new series, The Historic Evil Women. Now, just because the series title has evil, doesn't mean we're out to paint all women in a negative light. History speaks neutrally about everyone, men and women alike, and will soon bring you a series on evil men as well. We're here to share the fascinating lives of these historical figures, how their power, charm, and influence shaped their world. And believe me, these stories are unlike anything you've heard before. The Allure of Barbara Palmer. Today, we unravel the story of Barbara Palmer, the first Duchess of Cleveland, a woman so captivating that even King Charles II couldn't escape her charms. This was no ordinary royal affair. This was a saga of power, seduction, and ambition, played out in the very heart of the British monarchy. So let's get into it. The history of the British royal family is full of ups and downs, and there was a dark day in the annals of time when King Charles II, a man of extravagant tastes, knelt before an attractive and alluring woman, begging for forgiveness for some transgression. She, with her vibrant red lips, wore a smile as she watched him. Though silent, it was evident that every fiber of her being was radiating pride. After all, why wouldn't it? A king was bound by the chains of her silken hair. She had no intention of releasing him, as her life's goal was to make herself as powerful and influential as possible. So far, she had succeeded, and that success only held as long as the king was in her grasp. Very little is known about how Charles II became entangled with Barbara Villiers, but it is commonly believed that their relationship began when Charles, having lost his throne, was living in exile, striving to regain power. A woman as beautiful and captivating as Barbara was a rare find. Charles, upon meeting her, became enamored, falling in love with her beauty and charm. Soon enough, Barbara responded so passionately to his desires that he ended up making her the center of his world. When Charles returned from exile, Barbara was among those welcoming him back to London, though her welcome was quite different from that of others. While the citizens of London danced in the streets to celebrate their king's return, Barbara presented him with her enticing body, and the two indulged in each other, oblivious to the world around them. This intense union left Charles in a state of ecstasy for days afterward. Despite his experience with women, there was something about Barbara that lent a fresh excitement to every encounter. Barbara's background and early life. Barbara was born in 1640. She was only 3 years old when her father was killed. Later, her mother secretly married a relative, Charles Villiers, a man of modest means. As a result, Barbara's upbringing was fraught with poverty, hardship, and despair. Yet she was not deprived in every sense, for nature had blessed her with an abundance of beauty. By the age of 16, Barbara's features had become as sharp as a double-edged sword, with youth and beauty radiating from every part of her. Around this time, her family moved to London, and Barbara's untamed youth drove her onto a new path. The closed doors of fate opened, and her life of deprivation gave way to a life of comfort, but at the cost of her chastity, which she did not consider something worth preserving. According to Don B. Suda, Barbara's bewitching beauty first ensnared a powerful landowner, Lord Chesterfield. He was utterly captivated by this young woman who was 16 years younger than him. Chesterfield, a cold-hearted man, showered Barbara with precious gifts in exchange for the warmth of her youthful body, which he relished. These relations brought Barbara comfort. But when she saw that the elderly lord balked at marriage and that her life with him would ultimately be limited, she moved on after 2 years and set her sights on a new target, entering the royal court and marriage to Roger Palmer. Now 18, with 2 more springs having added to her blossoming youth, her seductive eyes had grown sharper. The cold companionship of an older man had kindled a fire of desire in her veins, one that her new partner, Roger Palmer, could both ignite and quench. Since Roger was employed in the royal palace, Barbara saw him as both a stepping stone and an ideal companion for the knights, and married him. Although this marriage lasted a while, Barbara, a woman who missed no opportunity for even minor financial gain, continued her relationships with Chesterfield and many others. Roger, who was studying law at the time, realized just a few days after the wedding that his new bride would hardly remain under his influence. Upon entering the royal court through her husband, Barbara spread her charms generously. Anyone who approached her found satisfaction for their desires. From the high-ranking court officials to the lowest employees, she became their mistress, and soon her fame, or rather her notoriety, spread throughout Britain. Capturing the heart of King Charles II. During this period, Charles II was in exile, and efforts to restore him to power were accelerating. Meanwhile, Barbara's own ambitions were reaching new heights. Her relative, Sir Ian Broderick, a high-ranking supporter of the king, needed a reliable messenger to establish contact with the exiled king. He chose Barbara for this mission, as it was essential for her husband to remain in England. Filled with enthusiasm and fervor, she not only delivered the message, but captivated the king with her charm, leaving him so smitten that he became her devoted admirer. During their encounter, Barbara reportedly told the king, "Do you know that the name Charles holds great significance in my life? Before you, another Charles shared his love with my mother and was like a stepfather to me." Their meeting concluded with an exchange of passionate kisses and promises to meet again. When Charles II's exile ended, and he returned to London to reclaim his throne, the city welcomed him with a golden evening celebration. That evening turned into night, marking the first night of his restored reign. In the soft bedding of Whitehall, Charles lay entranced in Barbara's fragrance, engrossed in her charms, without a care for Roger Palmer's reaction. The truth is, they were so lost in each other that they barely thought of anything else. Either that night or the next, Barbara became pregnant for the first time. When she later gave birth to her son, people were astounded by how closely the newborn resembled Charles II. Palmer, though aware of everything, remained silent, likely finding it wiser not to interfere in the king's fascination with his unrestrained wife. The reign of influence as Lady Castlemaine. To secure the future of the children he had with Barbara, Charles II ensured that her so-called husband, Roger Palmer, was granted the title of Irish Earl. By this time, everyone knew the nature of Barbara and Charles II's relationship. Palmer, however, continued to stay silent, choosing to distance himself from Barbara. He was later bestowed with the title of Earl of Castlemaine, and Barbara herself became Lady Castlemaine. Having gained Charles's confidence, Barbara was incredibly powerful and had a significant influence in royal affairs, often appearing at public events with the king, who was firmly under her sway. Courtiers recognized that her favor was essential for the king's approval, and so none dared to defy her orders. Tensions with Queen Catherine. In 1662, the royal family arranged a political marriage for Charles II with Princess Catherine of Portugal. At that time, Barbara was pregnant with Charles's second son, who would later be named Charles as well. Furious at the news of this marriage, Barbara soon realized that, despite her influence, she could not prevent this royal decision. Resolutely, she decided to express her displeasure in her own way. She ordered that a large number of her undergarments be washed and displayed in the palace grounds for all to see, as a bold declaration of her strong ties with Charles II. Charles himself wished to formally establish Barbara in the palace. Catherine, being short, unattractive, and unappealing in contrast to Barbara, had little choice but to accept her husband's mistress in the royal circle, especially since Roger Palmer had legally separated from Barbara and had announced he would no longer bear responsibility for her lavish expenses and debts. By now, Barbara had recovered from childbirth and was once again by Charles's side. Following months of intense pressure from Barbara, Charles II eventually forced Queen Catherine to accept Barbara. Although Catherine initially resisted, Charles threatened that he would fill the palace with numerous mistresses if she refused. This frightening ultimatum compelled her to reluctantly welcome Barbara, who was then assigned a room adjacent to the king's, connected by a private door. Rivalry and influence in the court. Barbara soon became so dominant in courtly affairs that, although orders were issued in Charles's name, they essentially reflected her will. Courtiers vying for titles or honors sought Barbara's favor and frequently presented her with valuable gifts. Her influence over Charles continued to grow as he showered her with wealth, marking this period as her peak. However, the first crack in her stronghold of power appeared soon. Queen Catherine had invited a 15-year-old French girl named Frances Stuart as a maid. Frances, with her well-proportioned physique and enchanting beauty, was irresistible and exuded such confidence that she quickly became the center of attention in the palace, sparking waves of intrigue and desire. The servants, courtiers, and ministers had started enjoying the favors of this enchanting woman, and even the king himself had taken notice. He became so infatuated with this young maiden that he forgot about Barbara Villiers. However, Frances soon ran off with one of her lovers, bringing this chapter to an end. With her departure, Barbara once again rose to importance, fulfilling the king's desires and keeping him close to her. This time, she aimed to capture his attention so completely that he wouldn't look anywhere else, effectively dominating Charles II. This period, as alluded to in the opening lines, illustrates the extent of Barbara's influence. She even managed to remove certain high-ranking officials who opposed her and secured positions for her allies. Barbara wielded so much power at court that even the king had to submit to her will. The decline of Barbara's power. As with any power, however, it eventually begins to wane. Barbara and Charles's relationship faced a shift, and as his attraction waned, other women entered his life. Among them were two particularly captivating figures, Moll Davis, a dancer, and Nell Gwyn. Despite this, Barbara's political influence persisted. Yet, her insatiable desires led her to seek other lovers, and she entered into affairs with 3 men simultaneously. When she bore her 6th child, the king refused to acknowledge the child as his. Enraged, Barbara discarded all decorum, saying whatever came to mind, leading to the end of her relationship with Charles. Though he continued to provide her with financial support, their romantic ties were severed completely. Final years and last lovers. In 1676, Barbara moved to Paris, where she engaged in numerous affairs with various men. She eventually returned to England, but by then Charles II had been executed, effectively ending her privileges. In her later years, she found herself once again facing poverty and hunger, reminiscent of the hardships she endured from age 3 to 16. Chroniclers say that as she aged, she began to pay young men to be her companions. Her last admirers included people from various classes, most of whom were motivated by financial gain. At age 44, Barbara maintained relationships with a 34-year-old man and several others. When her estranged husband, Roger Palmer, died in 1705, the 65-year-old Barbara declared herself fully independent. Even in her old age, she struggled with her desires, but those who came her way didn't stay for long. Her life ended tragically, in poverty and solitude, on October 9, 1709. At that time, Barbara Villiers had nothing left but the faded memories of her once vibrant and colorful past. Conclusion: The rise and fall of Barbara Palmer. Barbara Palmer lived a life that oscillated between scandalous indulgence and sheer influence until it all came crashing down. The tale of her rise and fall is one of both caution and fascination. If you enjoyed this journey through history, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more captivating stories. And tell us in the comments what you think of our new series, The Historic Evil Women. Until next time,